Thanks, Delaney. Thank you, Funky Bunch and Funky Bunch Jr. All right, next act. Oh, well, maybe not an act, but our big guest tonight. It's going to be a bit of an intro, but it's worth it. Tonight we have Heather White joining us. Heather White is a nationally recognized conservation and environmental policy expert. She's the founder and CEO of the nonprofit OneGreenThing.org, which tackles eco-anxiety through joyful daily action, inspiring culture change for policy solutions. She's the author of 3 books, including Eco-Anxiety, Saving Our Sanity, Our Kids, and Our Future. Her 20-plus years of experience includes, but is not limited to, working as an attorney for Al Gore's presidential campaign, director of environmental education advocacy at the National Wildlife Federation, environmental health watchdog in Washington, D.C., and she served as president and CEO of Yellowstone Forever, the nonprofit partner to Yellowstone National Park. Heather has been featured on Good Morning America, CBS News, and PBS, and has been quoted in the New York Times, The Guardian, and Teen Vogue. She currently lives in Bozeman with her husband and 2 teenagers. And following Heather's talk tonight, she'll be sitting down up here on stage with 4 Billings student environmental leaders for a fireside chat. So we have a whole bunch this evening, folks. So Heather, can I call you on stage now to join us? Thank you. Let's hear it for Heather White. And while Heather's getting set up here, so our students who will be joining us tonight are going to be John Mossbacher, who studies environmental science and epidemiology here at MSU-B, and also does water quality testing. And we'll also have Ella Fox, who studies environmental science at Rocky Mountain College, is the president of their environmental club, and is involved in Yellowstone River research and cleanup. And we'll also be joined by Matt Clark, who is a junior at Billings West High School and is also a student at MSU-B, and is majoring in political science and is a member of his environmental club at Billings West High School. And our last climate leader will be Asland Morrissey Peters, who is an undergrad in environmental studies here at MSU-B, a minor in English, and is a sustainable fashion designer. All right, thanks, Heather. Here you go.
Thank you so much, Katie. And let's hear it for the Funky Bunch. Talk about brave. These kids are brave, and I tell all the middle schoolers and high schoolers that I talk to, but especially middle schoolers, if you can get through middle school, you can do anything. I fervently believe that. And it was really fun as we were doing this sound check a little bit earlier. I could hear the laughter as they were prepping for this event tonight. And it just reminded me about why we're here. And in the environmental community, a lot of times we talk about next generation, like we're doing all this work for the next generation. But we kind of act like they're strangers, that we don't know who they are. But in fact, they're not just the Funky Bunch. They're our nieces, our nephews, our kids, our grandkids, our neighbors. And there are a lot of people that we don't even know that we will love when they come into this planet. And that's the ethic and the ethos that I want us to really center ourselves in tonight as we think about climate action and the incredible challenges ahead. And in fact, I want you to think about a person in your life that has made the life you're living possible. For some of us, it's a mentor, a teacher, a grandparent, a parent, maybe it's a neighbor. For me, thinking about the person who's made the life I'm living possible is as simple as thinking about apple pie. And this is my granddad, Bill Poston, who was born in 1902. And that's me. And for those of you born in the early 70s, I hope you appreciate the Holly Hobby outfit that I'm wearing, but it definitely has Holly Hobby vibes. It's my 4th birthday. But whenever I would visit my granddad, and I visited him a lot, he would make me an apple pie from scratch. He would pick apples from his orchard. He'd slice them up. He'd make dough by hand and roll it out. And then he would weave it in this beautiful lattice. This lattice work, you know what I'm talking about, the top, the crust of the apple pie. And then he would sprinkle cinnamon sugar on top. Now, I didn't think much about this apple pie when I was growing up. I just, knew it tasted delicious. It was a great dessert. Until one day, about 20 years after he passed, I was apple picking with my kids. We were in Winchester, Virginia, and I was checking out at the old-timey store, and I had kind of this bucket of apples. And as I was checking out, I could smell apple pies baking. And that smell transported me into my granddad's kitchen. And I actually had to sit down because just tears started streaming down my face. Because in that moment, I realized my granddad had Parkinson's disease. It took him about an hour to get dressed in the morning because of his tremble and his tremors. But every time I came to see him, he made me an apple pie from scratch. It must have taken hours of concentration for him to do that gesture that was way more than a dessert. It was an act of profound love and kindness and commitment to me. And that feeling that I had at that old-timey store, and my kids were like, "What's going on, Mom?" Just tears streaming down my face. I call it breathtaking gratitude. I was overcome with breathtaking gratitude. And for those of you who are younger, if you're in middle school or high school, you may not have had that experience yet. But for the older folks, I know we've had that moment. Maybe you're in the grocery store, maybe you're in traffic, maybe you're just taking a walk and you realized how much someone loved you. And it takes your breath away. And that gratitude and that idea of every day taking a moment and trying to pay it forward to the next generation in honor of the people who've created the life we're living and made it possible is really the spirit of One Green Thing. And what I call it is thinking like an awesome ancestor. And I will have to tell you, it's harder and harder each day. Raise your hand if you find it harder to tumble out of bed and stumble into the kitchen, right? The headlines, right, are pretty tough, right? It's grim. The news is grim. We are seeing in real time tremendous amount of assaults on civil rights, on human rights, on environmental rights. On Friday, the EPA announced that it was no longer going to track air pollution from companies. I mean, it's breathtaking in the changes that we've seen, right? We want to embark on a practice of breathtaking gratitude, but we are faced with incredible challenges. And this is my favorite coffee cup, but I'm finding it harder and harder to pour myself that cup of ambition every day. And I think many of us are feeling what's called, burnout. Burnout if you've been in climate action for a really long time, if you're a young person and you see the challenges that we have ahead, when you have seen big progress in your life. I mean, there are so many people that we don't even know that work so hard that we could have the life we're leading, whether it be the expansion of civil rights, whether it be, the passage of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all of these, the invention of penicillin, all of these ways to make our life better in the future. More and more people are asking themselves, what is the future going to look like, especially if we don't take rapid action on climate? And the fact is, this quote is real. Burned out people will keep burning out the planet. As much as we have to talk about our favorite policy solutions, our favorite technological solutions when it comes to climate, as much as we need to have rapid change to clean energy and focus on energy efficiency, we have to recognize that these challenges and the constant barrage of news is taking a real toll on our mental health and we have to create space and time for joy and for community. I've written 3 books about what's called eco-anxiety, the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. And as you heard from my introduction and you heard from Katie as she was talking about my experience, I've been doing this for about 25 years now. But it was really a conversation with my kids when they were teenagers that brought me to study this issue, because they are feeling very alone in climate action, which was really hard for me because I was just like, can I give you my CV? Like, I wanted to show my teenagers, look at all these things that I did. I worked for Al Gore's campaign in 2000. Come on. I really tried. But I kind of felt like if my kids were feeling alone in climate action and feeling that baby boomers and Gen X, which is the demographic I'm part of, were leaving this all on their shoulders, I asked myself what was happening around other dinner tables and thought it was really important for more people to start understanding this term. And so eco-anxiety is a relatively new term. It's not a diagnosis in the diagnostic manual that psychologists and psychiatrists use for mental disorders. It's not. It's not a diagnosis, but it is a growing trend. And the American Psychological Association has defined it as the chronic fear of environmental doom. It's also been in the Oxford English Dictionary. It was first defined in September 2021, so pretty recently, as unease or apprehension about the future because of human activity impacting global warming. What I'm finding is that this term eco-anxiety is more about an anxiety about the future and the future that the next generation is inheriting from us. It's more encompassing than that. But other terms that you may hear include solastalgia, climate grief, eco-despair, climate anxiety, for example, and climate doom. And in my research, there are 3 big factors to this growing phenomenon that we're seeing, especially with young people, but for a lot, I would say for folks who are paying attention to this issue, if you're not anxious, there's probably, you probably need to do more research, because the people who are doing research are anxious about the future. But there's 3 big factors that cause this, especially as it relates to Generation Z. And Generation Z, as a reminder, are kids born from 1997 to around 2017. And there's Generation Alpha behind them. But they're teenagers and in their 20s right now. And Generation Z has higher rates of anxiety and depression than other demographics. And this includes even our conversation now about mental health that we didn't necessarily have when I was growing up, but they are experiencing more anxiety and depression, even if you account for our better conversations about mental health. The second is chronic loneliness. There is an annual survey of loneliness by Cigna. And in these surveys, 8 out of 10 Gen Zers experience chronic loneliness, compared to 5 out of 10 baby boomers. So we have a situation where young people are actually lonelier than the elderly. And if I called you elderly and you're a baby boomer, I'm sorry. It's just what the research says. And the third is a hyper-awareness of the climate crisis. And this is in part from their lived experience, whether it be the fires in LA just this year, whether it be the floods in Texas, Hurricane Helene last year, whether it be their lived experience. It's also driven by social media. Because young people, a lot of times grown-ups like me, when we think about social media, we think about cyberbullying, we think about misinformation. These are all really important issues. But we tend to discount how often young people are seeing climate disasters in real time reported by young people their age on all these social media platforms. So even though they may not be experiencing the drought in Kenya, they see the impacts. Even if they may not know about, have never been to Beijing, they may see video of the subway flooding in Beijing from social media. So young people are seeing in real time these climate disasters. And in fact, there was a survey in 2021 of 16,000 young people, ages 16 through 25, and 1 in 4 are hesitant to have children of their own because they're so worried about the climate crisis. I want to be really clear, that's not because it's a lifestyle choice or they just didn't necessarily want to be a parent. It's because they're so worried about the future that we're leaving them. And I think that's a call to action for all of us in the older generations to make sure that we not only commit to climate action, which everybody in this room already has, but that we're having conversations and we're really engaging with young people and listening to them about their concerns and letting them know that this isn't all on their shoulders. There's some recent studies. I mentioned there's 4 in 10 young people are hesitant to have children of their own because of eco-anxiety. In the United States, the proportion of individuals worried about climate change increased from 51% in 2010 to 64% in 2023. And this is a study from the Yale Climate Communications Project. I highly recommend following if you're not, but they have an incredible amount of research. But this is so interesting. 64% of Americans believe in climate, not only that climate change exists, but that we should have climate action. So 2/3 of Americans believe that this problem exists and we need to take action. But in further surveys, people who want to take action tend to underestimate how many people agree with them. So I think it's important for us to have more conversations about climate and about climate solutions and what's possible and the healthier, greener future that we can create if we get it right, because we know people are concerned and want to see action. The BBC also reported that searches on the term climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, and these other terms that talk about the mental health impacts of climate has increased significantly. It surged 27-fold. And then there was a survey in 2023 of California youth, and 68% experienced climate anxiety. And here in Montana, many of you are probably aware of the study that was in the Journal of Rural Health, but there was a survey of 125 Montana farmers, and 70% believe that climate change is having an impact on their agricultural business, and nearly 75% are experiencing anxiety about the impact of climate change on agriculture. And this, of course, was in the Billings Gazette, an article by Hannah Mark covering that peer-reviewed study in the Journal of Rural Health. So this is a growing issue and a growing concern, and it's intergenerational, but young people especially are feeling the feels when it comes to climate. I'm sure you're probably thinking, well, thanks, Heather. That was really depressing. That's really depressing. We know it's bad. We know we need urgent action. We know we need it now. Young people are worried. It's making an impact on their daily life. Where do we go from here? So one of the things I realized in my conversation with my kids and other professionals in climate action, environmental policy, and law and public health was that not only did I need to create a space for more people to start talking about mental health and climate, grounded in this sense of intergenerational action and conversation, but that I needed to help people see themselves in climate action. I think for a lot of people, that 63% we were talking about, the 2/3 majority almost, that really wants to see significant action and believe in climate, they don't know where to begin. You know, if I have an SUV, can I say I'm an environmentalist? You know, if I had a straw at lunch today, you know, can I do that, or is that inauthentic? Where do I begin and how do I start? And so I realized that we needed to create a path for more people to see themselves in climate action. When we do research on individual behavior change, trying to get people to be more environmental, environmentalists like me often start the conversation at the wrong place. We start with the what. Do this, not that. Skip the straw, buy this brand, not that brand. And we forget the most important question when it comes to individual behavior change is the who. Who are you? How do you show up for the people you love? And how do you want to show up for humanity? And so I realized that if we start talking about the who and are able to connect people with a who, then the context of the behavior change makes sense. Because you're talking about who you are, who you want to be, what your skills are, what your legacy is, not just adapting a behavior. And in fact, a great book I highly recommend is called Atomic Habits by James Clear, if you all are familiar with that. And James Clear does a great synopsis of the research that shows you are more likely to adopt a new habit if you identify with that as a person. So for example, if I say, hi, I'm Heather and I'm a swimmer, I'm more likely to swim 3 times a week than if I say I'm going to swim 3 times a week. Like, incorporate that into your identity. So what I did is I created an assessment. It's a little bit like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or those BuzzFeed quizzes, like what rock star would you be, But the idea is, who are you in service and how do you show up for the people that you love? And I'm going to go back because that is an interactive slide, but it didn't work right now. But there's 7 different archetypes. The first is the adventurer, which embraces the physicality of the outdoors. They love taking calculated risks. They're the ones that love to take people outside their comfort zone, the adventurer. Then there's the beacon, and the beacon is kind of what you think about if you think about a Gen Z climate activist. The beacon loves to speak truth to power. They're the personality type that if you give them, a poster board and some markers and a bullhorn, they're out, organizing and getting people to a rally. And of course, they're important because they help people know that it's safe and that it's important to stand up. The third is the influencer, and my teens give me a hard time about this because it's not an influencer in like that sense, like the social media influencer. But this is the people person, the connector, the person who's like, please come to this talk tonight, and when you go there, make sure you meet Aslan and John and Ella and Matt. You're gonna love these young people. That's the connector. The connector is also following the latest trends in sustainability and loves keeping people up to date. Then there's the philanthropist, which is a super big word, especially when I talk to kids. They think it's pretty funny because it sounds like, the Monopoly guy when I talk about the philanthropist. But it's just a big word for the giver, the person who loves to donate their time, their resources. The board members of nonprofits who are here are likely in this category. Thank you for your service. They're also the kind of the friend that will bring you soup or maybe make you a Spotify playlist when you're feeling down. There's the sage, which is connected to the spiritual case for climate action. The sage is really important because obviously there's a tremendous amount of political rancor and discord. And by talking about this moral case, this spiritual case for caring for creation, they have a really important role to break through that rancor and start getting people to talk about values and talking about that intergenerational duty we have. Then there's the spark, which when some people take this assessment, it's like a 5-minute online quiz. It's at onegreenthing.org. But sometimes when people take the assessment and they get the spark, they're not really sure, does that mean I'm a leader? But the spark is the +1. It's the cheerleader, the person who's like, sure, I'll go with you, no problem. And if we don't have a spark, if we don't have the person who shows up, who'll go with you to the bike rally, who will go with you to do a river cleanup, who will go with you to a conversation like this, there really isn't a movement. So the spark is always cheering on their friends. And then there's the wonk, which many of us in the environmental community are, and the wonk, and I have to tell you, 7th graders think this is the funniest word ever. This word comes from my days as a policy wonk in DC, but the 7th graders are like, dude, I'm a wonk, that's hilarious. But the wonk is focused about the science and data, and they can translate a lot of these complex issues in ways that people can understand. So based on your service superpower, right, what your strengths are and gifts in service, I then match you to a daily practice of sustainability. A daily practice of sustainability. It's what I call a one green thing. It's so simple. And as a policy wonk and as a lawyer, it was really scary to be like, okay, I have this idea. We do one thing each day for the environment. Like, it's so simple, right? It's so simple when all I want to do is talk about solar arrays and battery storage. But to be able to talk about this daily practice in a way that's authentic to you based on your service superpower, whether it's a call to your member of Congress, 202-224-3121. That's the congressional switchboard. I have it programmed in my phone. Or if it's a walk in nature, if it's coming to a lecture like this, if it's researching clean energy in your neighborhood, if it's having a critical conversation with someone, these one green things are really important. But it's not about the math of your individual carbon footprint. It's not. Don't get too wrapped up in that. A lot of people freeze when they start the sustainability journey and they're like, I brought a reusable mug, but then I found out it may have lead in it, or I'm using this cool new product and it's made of bamboo, but then I heard bamboo really isn't sustainable, and they just have a freeze response. So know that the intention matters, and the reason it matters is because we are driving culture change. Every person in this room is a culture change agent. every person in your community, in your family, in your friend group. You can help people see the possibility of a healthier, greener, more just future, and you can help them understand that this idea of doing one green thing each day can really make a difference. And again, your daily one green thing isn't about the math, it's about culture change. But the good news, according to Project Drawdown and RARE, is that if we all do it, individual and household emissions can get us 25% of the global carbon emission reductions we need. So if we all do it, this daily practice of sustainability makes a difference. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into 7 ways to deal with eco-anxiety while I subtly check my time, and I'm doing great. So the first is to find your service superpower. Like I said, it's available on onegreenthing.org. The second is feel all the feels and journal. I'm a huge advocate of journaling. I know this seems strange. Heather, how does journaling help reduce my carbon footprint? It helps you process things like, what do you want your legacy to be? What are you going to be doing each day to try to create that healthier, greener future? What does that future look like? How can we do as much as we can to protect what we have, especially the public lands here in Montana, which are under threat, it feels like, on a daily basis. But how can we also build to that future and start having the conversation about what that future looks like? Oops. The second is to embrace creativity. I think right now, a lot of us are in a cycle, I'm certainly guilty of this, are in the dopamine hit cycle of refreshing the news, because it's been a lot. It's been a lot. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I think a lot of people are having this feeling of rage, like as they read the news, as they're on social media, and this is across generations. And we need to create time to put our phones down and tap into the creative part of our brains. These are actually my watercolors. I took this class at the Emerson. I am like the least creative person you could ever imagine. Give me a spreadsheet and like let me cite scientific articles. I'll do that all day. But just taking that time out for creativity is an important way to de-stress, but also tap into the creativity we need to move towards this healthier, greener, more just world. Unplug and connect to nature. All kinds of scientific peer-reviewed literature that says time outside reduces blood pressure, reduces the stress hormone cortisol, increases a sense of overall well-being, and we are all, as E.O. Wilson talks about, we all have biophilia. We are hardwired to connect to nature. This is obviously easier for us to do here in Montana than many people who don't have access to green spaces, so thinking about climate justice and understanding that the people who have contributed the least amount of carbon pollution are suffering the most and don't necessarily have these resources or access to green places like this is an important part of what we need to be focused on. Speaking out and acting locally, and this is actually my daughter's 2 best friends at the Bozeman climate strike in 2019, which I read about in my books. The biggest thing, I think, for all of us is to ask the young people in your life how they feel about the future we're leaving them. It's really interesting because sometimes my friends are like, well, Heather, my kids don't have eco-anxiety because, they're not your kids. Your kids have eco-anxiety because, what you do and what you talk about. And I say to them, you know what? Why don't you just ask? Just ask the young people in your life how they feel about the future we're leaving them. And to a person, it's been a game-changing conversation. I had a friend who said to me that her son, who was 15 at the time, they were having dinner, put down his fork and said, Mom, I think about climate change every day. We just don't talk about it in this family. And her younger son, who was 13, was like, yeah, what are we supposed to do? We are burning up the planet. What is life going to be like for us? And she wouldn't have had that conversation if we hadn't talked, but it was a way for them as a family to start talking about what they were gonna do, how they were gonna embrace a one green thing as a family, and start becoming more aware about their role and what they can be doing to put us on the path to a greener future. And then, of course, think like an awesome ancestor. When I talked about breathtaking gratitude and thinking about that moment of deep and profound love that we all experience and thinking about how we can create it to the people we haven't met yet, how we can be awesome ancestors is a really important part of how we can deal with this stress and start adopting that long-term view as we work to these changes in policy and in law. And these are my ancestors, all of my grandparents. And I'll just leave you with this. You know, hope and joy are not naive, right? Because a lot of times people don't necessarily find place for joy when they're talking about climate action because the news and the science is grim and stark. But we're not about gloom and doom. We have to create time for joy. We have to have hope because hope is defiant. And my friend Erin Brockovich, who wrote the foreword to One Green Thing and to Eco-Anxiety, always says Superman isn't coming. Superman's not coming is the title of her book. You know, the future is up to us. It's not something that just happens to us. We are the ones, and the time is now. And with that, you can find your service superpower. Here's a QR code if you want to take a brief picture, but also know it's right at onegreenthing.org. And I am going to have a fireside chat now with our Montana youth leaders, and I'm going to invite them up. And we're going to move the table a little bit more to the center now. And please stay in touch. You know, follow us at One Green Thing on social. And yes, I am on TikTok to my kids' absolute dismay. It is cringy, but I'm there at Heather White Official and at One Green Thing. But please follow us, and thank you so much for the time to connect with all of you today. Thank you. Can everyone see us? Okay. We need you if you can't hear us, wave your hands or holler, okay? But like I said, one of the biggest things and the biggest takeaway when I do talks, and I do talks around the country, I talk to like K through 12, universities, Warner Music Group, United Talent Agency, you know, a lot of big corporations, TIAA, Ziff Davis, you name it. I always say the biggest takeaway is to ask the young people in your life how they feel about climate, what gives them hope. And so I really want to make sure when I have an opportunity to speak, I also share the mic and offer a platform to young leaders in the community so you all can really hear from them, because this ultimately is about intergenerational connection and action. So with that, I'm just going to ask everybody, I'm going to start with John on the end, to just introduce themselves again. So if you could just do a brief introduction and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, for coming out. First of all, my name is John Mossbacher. I'm a student at MSU-B. I'm an environmental science major, and I also work with the NIH collecting water samples across the Yellowstone River.
Okay, my name is Matt. I am a junior at West High School. I also attend MSU-B here studying political science. I'm in my high school's environmental science club as well, and I help out with City Hall sometimes with our parks and kind of protecting the environmental aspect on a more political level.
Hi. I'm Ella Fox. I am a senior at Rocky. I'm an environmental science major, and I'm also president of our environmental club. I work for the Yellowstone River Research Center, our outdoor rec department at Rocky, and yeah, that's about it.
Hello, I'm Asland. I'm a student here at MSU-B. I'm a junior. I'm in the environmental studies department with a minor in English that I'm working on. My research so far is focused on sustainability, specifically in fashion, and then further dabbling in Superfund sites.
I love that you said you're dabbling in Superfund sites. Bless you, bless you. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to sit on the stage here and share your point of view. My first question to kind of all of you is, have you heard the term eco-anxiety? Have you heard the term climate anxiety? Is this something that's new to you? So just tell me about your experience, and I'll start again with you, John.
Okay, thank you. I hadn't heard of the term before until you had mentioned it and reading it in your book. It's a wonderful term, but yeah, so this is a first time for me. I'm really excited to get to know about everything that you have in the book. It's been a wonderful experience.
I haven't heard specifically about the term, but being a high school student, I don't think there's a single other student that I've met that hasn't had some kind of anxiety surrounding the environment or surrounding climate change, and that's one of the reasons that we are here today. So I haven't heard the specific term, but I know kind of the effects of it, and I've seen it in day-to-day life.
I hadn't heard of the term. However, since hearing about it, I definitely experience it. And I think it's a very common thing when you think about it. Like when you know what it is, you can see it everywhere. And I think it's something that should truly be talked about more since hearing about it.
Similar to Ella here, I hadn't really heard the term before, but definitely experienced it. Specifically this year, it's been an interesting time. But yes, a lot of anxiety about, well, everything.
Thank you so much for that. And I hear that a lot, just like Ella and Matt and John and Aslan were saying, of like, I've never heard the term, but oh, I have it. And I hear that from all generations, just so you know, not just the young people, but especially the young people. I know a question I get a lot when I speak to older audiences is, you know, why is Gen Z so stressed out? I do, I get this a lot. I know you all are like, have you read the papers? But seriously, I get this question a lot. And I talk about the term lived experience and how our lived experience is so different as older generations, as younger generations. So one of the exercises I do in an audience like this, but because there's not as many young people, I do say, you know, raise your hand if you've ever been in a first-person shooter drill in school as a student. And like, all the young people raise their hand, right? And I'm like, raise your hand if you're worried about income inequality and the ability to buy a house. Young people raise their hands. You know, so I kind of go through this as a way for people to start thinking about how different it was. You know, when my parents bought their first house, it was $35,000. Now, granted, it was in East Tennessee, you know, not necessarily a big real estate hub. But to think about housing costs now is just, and it all does relate to kind of this anxiety about the future. So with that, I'd love to ask the full panel, what do you want older generations to know about your lived experience? You know what, I know it's an open-ended, very broad question, but just kind of, what do you want them to know?
Okay. I guess mostly, I mean, I'm middle-aged kind of, 37 years old, back in college, but I believe that it's important to hear both sides, not just one side. It's not supposed to be like a fence between younger generations and older generations. Even if you disagree with whatever the topic may be, it's still important to do your own individual research and also listen to others who have done the same.
I would say I want older generations to know that it is okay to experience things like eco-anxiety, and it's okay to understand that younger generations experience it as well. And it's not necessarily the fact that you experience eco-anxiety, but what you do after that, because younger generations are doing a lot for environmental work as well, but that doesn't discredit you guys. You guys have done a lot to make these kinds of nonprofits and make these organizations possible for us to kind of further that education. So even despite things like eco-anxiety, you can still do a lot of help and aid the younger generation in kind of what's to come environment-wise.
I truly think the world is so incredibly divided right now, and I think everyone can see that. And I truly want everyone to know, older generations, younger generations, whatever, that you have to look at both sides, like Matt said. Like, you have to truly understand what's going on and all sides of it and where it can come from. And it's, I think, a really pressing issue that, like, it's this or that and very black or white. And I think at least younger generations are truly seeing that. But I do think it's okay to be in the unknown and to be okay with being uncomfortable. That's a really big thing, and I think, yeah, that's a really, be okay with being uncomfortable, but ask questions, and know that every experience is okay, and every experience is welcome, and every opinion is heard, so, yeah.
Just to, I guess, continue what everyone else is saying is, yeah, I think it boils down to a lot of like empathy, because besides age-wise, we are all human and we all live maybe not the same experience because everyone's life is different, but we all live the human experience. And we all know what it's like to be on this planet. And I think that a lot of the fears that my generation faces are also the fears that a lot of people have. So I think it's realizing that there's more in common than there is difference, and just coming together and working from an empathy-based take on it to work towards a solution.
Thank you all for that, because I'm also really hearing a thread about listening, deeply listening. And I think that, asking young people how they feel and really creating space, I know it's helped change my perspective because, as you may imagine, I like to talk. So asking the question and then waiting 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000 for the young people in my life to respond has been really important, but it's certainly helped open up my understanding and perspective. And I like how you're all saying that, yes, we're in this polarized situation right now, politically it seems, but when we move in close and start talking about our values, there's really a lot that's similar. Now I kind of want to dive in a little bit more into your individual journeys. And so I'm going to start with John again. Thank you for being right there. That's very easy to start with you, John. You are kind of, I guess, maybe people would say a non-traditional student, like you came to environmental science not right out of high school. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what you're doing?
Sure, yes, thank you for the question. I did take a hiatus from college. This is the third college I've actually been to, and for about 8 years, I took a step back, and it gave me some time to do my own individual, independent learning. And even though I was not in school, I was still had the spirit of that going on. It's been a long journey for me. It's been a passion of mine for a very long time. I started out in biology, and I guess out of all of those, I would say I started out as a sage, very spiritual with the environment, and I'm hoping to graduate into a wonk. So, yeah, I'm going to keep continuing my journey on with this college as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think that's important to know, too, is that, this is the biggest challenge of our lifetime, the climate crisis is. And everyone is welcome, and everyone is needed, and everyone's path is different and on a different timeline, which is great. I'm actually going to go to Matt now because we're just in order. And Matt, I know you are a speech and debate champion. Go Billings West. Can you talk a little bit about, you want to study political science. And for the folks in this room, in this audience, we know that climate isn't a technical solution. We know it's a political solution. Talk to us about how you think we can break through. No pressure, very easy question to answer, of course, but love to get your perspective.
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm going to throw a couple numbers at you. I promise it'll make sense in a second, but it is actually quoting the same Yale study that Heather was talking about earlier in your presentation. In the same Yale study, they kind of worked with George Mason University, and they separated what's called the 6 Americas. So it divides kind of our nation's people dependent on how worried they are kind of about the climate, which of course is a big, difficult question, right? How does anybody really feel about the climate? Even the people here we know are at least concerned or alarmed. But most of the people that fall into the first 2 categories, which would be concerned and alarmed, so the people that are most worried about the environment, make up 57% of our population, right? And that's a pretty significant amount of our population. However, if you kind of take this, because we're looking at a political aspect of it, there are, of course, people that don't believe it. And that makes up roughly 11% of the population. Unfortunately for us, that 11% of the population also takes up roughly 24% of our Congress. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for people like you and me who care about the environment to move the needle politically, right? That makes it a little bit more difficult for us to do anything significant when a disproportionate amount of it is shown in Congress. However, there are definitely things that we can do, and it doesn't have to be huge, major, drastic things either. There's a couple things that we can do kind of individually. A lot of the people that I mentioned that were super worried about the environment, a disproportionate amount of them might not necessarily think it's that urgent, or they think they can kind of put it on the back burner. Like a lot of us have talked about a lot of other issues that are happening in America right now. So, right, what is the environment, right, when we have such huge issues and wars and things like that going on? But if we kind of slowly accommodate and move that into day-to-day life because of that, because of the increase in Congress that disproportionately affects that aspect of it, we also have something called the spiral of climate silence. And it kind of adds on to eco-anxiety a little bit. The spiral of climate science is a phenomenon that happens where when something becomes an issue that's kind of difficult to understand, people don't really want to talk about it, and that makes it difficult for it to come up in everyday conversation. So if we want to move the needle on that, right, we have to kind of break that silence. We have to have it come up in everyday conversation, even when you're talking with dinner with your kids, or if you're talking to a friend, you have to kind of normalize it and personalize it to different people as well. So if that is something that we do want to do, we have to kind of make it individual, and we have to make it personal to each person that we talk to, right? So if you talk to a farmer or a hiker, right, that affects all of those people, and it's important that they understand how that affects them so that they can get involved as well.
Wow, Matt, the spiral of climate silence. The spiral of climate silence. This is the first time I've heard that. And I will include that in my next book, and you will be acknowledged and thanked. Thank you so much, Matt. I think that's a really powerful takeaway from this conversation today, is that we all in our own lives need to kind of move in close and have these critical conversations with people. Okay, Ella, you're next. Environmental science major, president of the club. On Saturday, Ella didn't talk about what she was doing, but she was doing a river cleanup, just so you know, like just to be completely on brand. But talk to us a little bit about kind of the future of sustainability. Like, you know what you want to do, but maybe friends who don't really understand what you're doing, talk a little bit how you think that sustainability and climate may impact them.
Okay, so a little bit about myself. I've done tons of cleanups. I've worked in agriculture, I've worked in guiding, I've worked in a million different things surrounding the environment. I grew up in it, so I kind of had that personal connection going into it, and going into school, going into my degree, but not many people have that personal connection. So it's hard talking to, I'm also on the soccer team, so it's talking to teammates who don't have that connection and saying, oh, I just went out and I did this research project in the middle of the woods. Like, I went on a random 20-mile hike, and they just don't, they're like, why? Why would you do that? So trying to encourage a connection without like there being a stigma around it of like, oh, I'm not as sustainable, or I'm not as, say, I don't do as much as you. I can't be an activist as much as you. So they don't do it. But any little thing helps. Like, I would love to do, my goal is to do wildland firefighting when I graduate, but that's a big jump. So I have to do the little steps to get to that, and to start living a more sustainable life, you start with the tiniest little change in everyday lives. And then slowly they build and they build and they build. And eventually you might not see it right away. It can take a lot of time, but seeing then, oh, I do make an impact, even if it's tiny. and you won't see it. You're not going to see when you decide to randomly ride your bike instead of driving one day. You're not going to see that impact right away. It's not going to be like, oh, magically it's fixed. It takes time and it's persistence, but we have to take away that stigma and that stress of I need to be doing this, I should be doing this, and it's I get to do it instead. And I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to do it. And so just adding those things, and hopefully you live a more sustainable life.
That sounds like a great endorsement for the concept of one green thing. Thank you very much, Ella. Absolutely. Yeah. But I do feel like people are afraid of being judged. They are afraid of doing it wrong, and pushing past that freeze experience is really hard. So now I'd love to go to Aslan. Aslan, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about kind of that freeze response. How do people push through? But also, could you tell us how you got interested in sustainable fashion? Like, maybe like a little bit about both of those things would be great.
Okay. Ooh, yay, it's on. So kind of talking about the one green thing, and where you're talking about like having that empathy connection going on to get out of the freeze response. So personally, I've experienced the freeze quite a few times in my life. And it's learning to not be like hard on yourself, because you can't be perfect all the time. That's just not what being human is. So it's working towards having a more like better view. It's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you're not like 100% like always like, I had to buy a one-use water bottle. Oh no, I'm a horrible person. No, you're fine. You're just a person. It happens. Part of the way that I deal with the freeze response is I look at ways that I can like work towards something different. So tying into the sustainable fashion, one of the things that I like to do now, specifically when I sew and I make things, is I prefer to use natural materials, specifically cotton. I learned to sew through quilting, so everything's usually cotton-based there. So that's usually one of my go-tos to start everything with, and then I work into either a different form of a natural material, or then I'll look into synthetic materials possibly. But it's essentially starting to look at like, oh, hey, this thing is made out of 100% cotton. This is great. It's breathable, so it's good for you as well. And it's, if you end up throwing it away and say you don't decide to keep it around to mend it or turn it into something else, it will deteriorate completely. That's one of the things that I like to look for. As for how I got into my fashion things, far too many episodes of Project Runway as a child, specifically the unconventional challenge.
Totally fair. Totally. Project Runway is amazing. And I love how you're saying that this isn't about perfection, it's about progress. And we need to invite as many people in as possible. Okay, so now I'm just going to, again, subtly check the time. We're doing great. Now you get to ask me questions. So, John, we'll start with you. Ask away.
Pretty straightforward. Is what drove you to write the book in the first place, and what was the process like?
Great question. It was a conversation with my kids at the dinner table. It really was that prompted me to write the book. I initially wrote this book for Gen X parents of Gen Z kids. So basically people in their late 40s and early 50s who have teenagers, because I thought it was a way for them to start to listen and hear how young people were thinking and get involved. But what's been really cool, John, for me, is that young people are finding my books and getting them for their parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, older generations. So that's been really, really fun for me. The process, for those of you who are interested in writing books, having an agent really helps. I really networked. I just had a friend who had a book about connecting to nature, and I asked, hey, do you know any agents I could talk to? And she said, talk to my agent. And I had one call and bam, had an agent. I mean, it was just crazy. But, and I think sometimes when things are supposed to happen, they do kind of unfold that way. I worked on a book proposal. Jane Friedman, highly recommend this person, Jane Friedman, if any of you are writers and want to write a nonfiction book. She has a great way to write format for a book proposal. I followed that outline just like any English teachers in the room would tell you to do, and I went to law school, and we do outlines for classes. And so once I got the book deals, I just set a timer, you all. I did the Pomodoro method. I wrote for 25 minutes. I took a 5-minute break. I wrote for 25 minutes. I took a 5-minute break. And then when I had done 2 hours, I took an hour break. So it really kind of flowed from there. But it was a very fun and intense process. I had about 3 months to write my first book, and Eco-Anxiety is the paperback and updated version of One Green Thing, and I also have 60 Days to a Greener Life. So it was super, super fun. It was just great. It was such a joy.
Thank you.
Matt?
What do you say to young people who are interested in sustainability as a career? We've seen a lot of devastating rollbacks by this specific administration, specifically on civil rights, climate justice. We've seen a lot of cuts to federal workforces, AmeriCorps, things like that. What do you say to people who want to work in environmental jobs later on?
Wow. So Matt, what I would normally say to people is, check out AmeriCorps. Think about the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, the PMF program that is focused for students to work in federal service. Those corps, as you said, are gone as of January of this year. They don't exist anymore. So it's tough. These are tough times just in general with young people in the economy. But what I try to remind people, and even in this age of AI, is you will be hired by people. And eventually the person who hires you will be a person, it won't be an AI person. So coming to events like this, getting to know people, sharing their experiences, doing what I call informational interviews, where you just ask an older person who has a career that you're interested in for advice and how they got where they are. People love to talk about themselves. But if you ask them for their journey and what they've done, you can learn a lot, and that's kind of how you create a mentor. I think when I was your age, Matt, I thought a mentor would just be like, hey, Heather, you're amazing. Let me take you under my wing, and I'll show you all these secret back rooms where deals are made and things are done. And that never really happened to me. It was more of me finding people whose career I was really interested in and reaching out and talking to them and then keeping up with them. And I kind of created a mentor that way over time, and it evolved. So mentoring people and being creative in how you do environment. I would say every job is a climate job eventually. Ella.
Okay, what's the thing that surprised you the most about your research and writing your books on eco-anxiety?
Oh, that's a good one. I think what surprised me the most was the audience of young people. As much as I say I like to share the mic and give you all stage, I'm kind of afraid. Like, teenagers are kind of scary. Like, bless you, high school teachers that are in the audience. You're kind of scary, because I know it, because I lived with teenagers. They have flown the nest now. But I did not intend this audience, but that's the audience that I've been reaching, and that's been really exciting for me. So I think that's been the most surprising thing for me, and I've been excited about that. When I gave my TEDx talk in Boston, if those of you have seen it, there were a lot of common themes in tonight's talk. I had 2 students from Emerson College that came up to me and said, we feel seen and we feel heard. And that was like the biggest compliment I could have ever gotten. So I think that's the most surprising thing. Aslan.
Okay, so what's the biggest action we can take to make an impact on the climate, like right now? Like if we were to like just walk out those doors and it's like,
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? I have in the appendix of Eco-Anxiety what I call the Eco Impact Top 10, which are like the 10 biggest things you can do. And, vote is what I talk about, but that doesn't always break the way that those interests are aligned. And so I think, yes, we can talk about individual habits you can make, like washing in cold water and using public transportation and pushing for clean energy, and doing all you can for community solar. But I think the real thing we need to do now, seriously, I know it sounds trite, but it is so important. We have to have conversations like this with people who don't necessarily believe with us, believe this issue, and we have to do it in a really respectful, deep way where we try to reach consensus. And I think for crowds like this, we have to lift each other up because so many people are burned out. You know, one of the things I do a lot of Earth Day talks, as you can imagine, and I have to remind my Gen Zers that I'm talking to is that the baby boomers created Earth Day. You know, the reason we have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, you know, the National Environmental Policy Act, all of these laws, and EPA was created in 1970, was because of young people 50 years ago that were taking action. And so I think I think that's the most important thing. So with that, I'd just like to ask you a couple more questions to the panel, and then we'll open it up to questions in just a few minutes. So I mentioned voting, you know, and that's usually, that was the number one thing. It still is, but a lot of the young people I talk to are pretty frustrated when they hear just vote, and a lot of times they hear vote harder. And vote harder isn't really the answer. Sometimes. I mean, I'm a lawyer, and of course, you know, I worked for Al Gore. I worked in the Senate and everything, so of course I'm going to say you have to participate in democracy. It's not a spectator sport. So, but this is the question. The question to the panel is, what do you say to your friends who are like, vote harder isn't, like, what am I supposed to be doing really? You know, like I skipped the straw, oh great. You know, I took my bike. How am I really going to make that difference?
Okay, I guess I'll start here. I believe other than voting, we could write letters to congressmen, you could attend the town hall, city council, any meetings, and just spread your own individual word by voicing your opinion and being in an educated and professional way as much as possible without bias and in a structured manner that people can understand.
Okay. Adding on to that, even here in Billings, Montana, we do have opportunities when it comes to environmental impacts and environmental issues to speak up. And you are allowed to speak in front of the council, in front of the mayor. If you don't feel like voting is enough, that is always an option. If that's something that you don't want to do, you can also just normalize it to people that aren't here. A lot of the times when we try to reach people, we try to reach environmentalists, right? We try to reach people that are majoring in climate action and things like that, but we need to reach other people outside of that as well. If we want to make it kind of a grander issue, we have to meet different kinds of demographics, and that just means talking about it and normalizing the topic.
Like everyone else has said, I do think speaking up is a thing, and I vote on everything. However, sometimes it's hard just being a number, and then when something doesn't go the way you wanted it, then that can feel really discouraging. So I do think using your own voice, speaking up, speaking to other people, not just in environmental fields. Climate change is not just an environmental, political issue. It's a public health issue. It's a sustainability issue. It's a business issue, economy issue. It's everything. Everything's connected. And I truly think the more people you talk to about it, the more insight you will have, the more wisdom you will have. But having your voice heard, whether that's through letters, through just small little meetings with your community, like going to your neighbor's house, having a cookout, just like talking, and having your voice heard and truly encouraging others to speak up as well. And that is how we are going to make a big change.
Yeah, so kind of going on the connection thing, you brought up the frustration of maybe when you vote it doesn't go the way that you wanted to, and that's a frustration that me and my peers have felt. And so when I get asked the question by them, they're like, it doesn't feel like voting's enough. This isn't the job that I personally want, but I do tell them that, you know, if you're not happy with what's happening in our politics, you could become a politician. There are people my age that will need to go into that field to represent us and represent our demographics. So I'm like, if you feel like your personality's for it, if you think this is like your calling and you're like waiting for a sign, and you want to see the representation, like you want to see yourself representative, and you want to see your community represented, maybe you maybe it's time to, go into that field to become, like, work towards being the next senator or governor or even on, like, the council or mayor. Just work towards that. And like, if you don't like your political climate, maybe it's time to become political.
Wow. Wow, that is awesome. That is absolutely awesome. Yeah, if it's time for you to run, you to step up. What I thought was really interesting is the common thread through all these responses was real life, in real life communications. You mentioned cookouts, you mentioned going before the city commission or the council, writing handwritten letters. Well, you might type them, but you can handwrite letters too. But just in person, IRL, in real life, conversation and action and advocacy, that's very, very exciting. And I would vote for any one of you, just so you know. Whatever you run for, you call me and let me know, okay? And you got my endorsement. You already got my endorsement. So I have two quick questions before we open it up to the audience. The first is kind of related to this in real life experience. We are dealing with a situation where we are in very different social media bubbles. Generationally, politically, sometimes members of our families aren't seeing the same thing about the same current event. And there's a lot of disinformation on top of that, right? There's bubbles and then there's actual disinformation. What advice do you have to kind of break through those bubbles and deal with disinformation? Because unfortunately, the truth is, you all are the experts in it because you've been exposed to more of it than most of us have. So tell us your thoughts on that.
For social bubbles, I believe it's important to look at multiple sources, and I had mentioned this briefly before. Even if you disagree with them, still know that they're out there. That will be one way to help, pop the social bubble. There's a lot of fake stuff out there, especially like with the deep fakes. Those are getting really good nowadays. There are ways to spot it, but it's just important to be mindful that to do your own research and ask, the right questions as well. So, and have a broad spectrum of questions, not just in one direction. So if you take individual slices from each different part of a topic, then you can kind of get a common theme out of it, I believe, and make your own decision and don't let someone make it for you.
When you hear things like disinformation, it can be a little bit hard to sometimes tell what is disinformation and what isn't. And one of the things that I personally like to do, of course, with going into your own sources and things like that, if somebody cites a statistic that seems a little unrealistic or doesn't seem like that's probably an accurate statistic, you can always just ask questions, right? Where did you get the study from? Like, what did the study surround it by? Who did the study, right? And a lot of the times, if it's something that they're not sure of, or they just saw it in passing on social media, it usually falls apart pretty quickly. But it's important that even when things like that are cited, and if there's an issue that you're really not sure about, to just look into your own sources, and that way you can kind of decide for yourself where you stand on the issue instead of kind of believing what other people say based off of just kind of their word.
I think we can make our own bubbles. It's not just like you can be put into them. We kind of make them. So like in the people we follow and all of that stuff, and it can feel very one-sided. So when you come across something else and you're like, ooh, that doesn't seem right, that's not what I'm all about, you can kind of just like push that to the side. But we have to be understanding everything. So trying to hear all sides and really research why this is being said is the big thing. Is like, why is this happening, or why do we believe this? Because that can be very telling in where information comes from. So I really do think research is a big thing, but being okay and accepting of all ideas. Because when you come across something else, it is important. And it could be there's a big difference between opinions and facts, but it could be a fact or it could be an opinion, and it's good to figure out which one it is. And that can be from sources, that could be from talking, but like actually doing a deeper dive, but being accepting of more ideas and not just the ones you follow.
So Yeah, I'm like I agree with everything they're saying. On the topic of disinformation and essentially disqualifying it from the conversation, uh, it can be exhausting because it often takes twice, sometimes thrice as long to correct the disinformation than it is to put it out there. Uh, so I follow a YouTuber, My Bubble, online. He goes by Mini Minuteman, and he's an archaeologist. And one of the things he does is he debunks conspiracy theories, specifically around archaeology, and it takes him hours to do these videos. A resource that I've seen that's been, like, over the past 2 years, I think that's been growing, is this resource called Ground News. It's a news network that essentially it looks at the news organizations and from all sides of the aisle, and it compares how they're reporting a topic. So you type in climate change, and it would be like, oh, these news sources on the left have written these stories, and these are like the biases that they have, and these are the stories from the right, and these are the central stories, and it breaks down that information for you really nicely. So yeah, it is really easy to get stuck in an echo chamber. So you were talking about that, where we create our own bubbles. And so it's really easy to be like, yeah, everyone thinks like me, I'm right. And it's really difficult to see when that viewpoint is challenged. Because to you, you're right, but, and I guess it's coming in with that perspective to realize that everyone thinks they're right when they're coming into the conversation. And it's really hard when maybe you've been told misinformation to realize that, and it can be a challenge to like reevaluate and be like, wait, no, I was wrong.
Right.
Maybe I should have done a bit more research or checked that source better.
Yes. Yes. I will say parenting helps getting to the, wait, I'm sorry, I was wrong. It does help you get to the more comfort to saying those things. But I think what I hear you all saying is that a curiosity and really checking what you're hearing, but also not letting it consume you. It's a challenge. I think it's a challenge, and it'll be an ongoing challenge. So with that, Katie, I think we're ready to open it up for questions from the audience. And Katie is going to be our Phil Donahue / Oprah and running up the aisles with the microphone. And if you could please use the microphone so everyone can hear you.
All right. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Let's hear it for Heather and our amazing student climate leader panelists. Thank you guys so much. I'm sure we have some questions out here, whether it's for Heather or one of our panelists. So just go ahead and raise your hand. I'll pass you the microphone. Yes, Tom?
Well, thank you for doing all of that. You explained what eco-anxiety is and what a little bit of its impact. But I guess the question I want to ask, is it good or is it bad? Is it good that we're now really going to grab a hold of things and do something? Or is it bad because everybody's going to go slouch in their own situation and not do anything, and it's going to get worse? In other words,
yeah,
where do we
question.
go from here?
Great question, Tom. Great question. A couple things. The first is, if eco-anxiety is interfering with your daily life, and for some young people especially it does, you do need to go see a mental health professional. There is the Climate Psychology Alliance and the Climate Psychiatry Alliance that are doing trainings for mental health professionals. And of course, the Montana Health Professionals for Climate Action are really tuned in to not only those practitioners, but also the researchers. So we have great people here. But in a societal sense, what does it mean? I would say it's up to us what it means. I think having the conversation is a way for more people to come into climate, talking about climate mental health, because as Matt was saying, Matt, you were saying you don't know anyone who hasn't had some type of anxiety, whether it's about the environment or just the future. Young people are understandably really worried about what we're leaving them, and so I see it as a call to action, but to fight the freeze response, which that's one of the things that we're talking about. When you have trauma, there's fawn, fight, flight, or freeze, and a lot of people have this freeze. So the hope is by talking about how you're feeling as being natural. You know, it's natural to have this anxiety, but here are ways to how to deal with it, and you all have a role. The hope is that we can move in that right direction, but ultimately it's up to all of us. Thank you, Tom, but I'm really glad you could mention that if it interferes with your daily life, you do need to see a mental health professional, and there are credentials out there.
Okay, I saw some more hands up for questions. Yes.
Well, climate change is such an all-encompassing issue, and I'm wondering from the panelists, what aspect of climate change freaks you out the most?
Go ahead. Yeah,
Okay,
go
I
ahead,
could
John.
start with that. What freaks me out the most is doing nothing about it and ignoring it. That's a very short answer, but that's what I have for that.
I would say, obviously, everybody's worried about carbon emissions, but I'm very worried about carbon emissions, specifically when they're kind of out of our hands, because there's a lot of times that we talk about, oh, you can use public transportation, you can do this, you can do that to decrease carbon emissions, but 72% of them are from big corporations and factories and things like that, and that's not necessarily something that we control, and that kind of freaks me out as well, and I think that kind of adds on to doing nothing, right? It's a very large step to take back emissions from things like that, and so I think that's the part that kind of scares me the most, is the doing nothing in regards to a specific aspect that is kind of out of our hands.
I'm terrified about it all, personally. Like, it's really scary. But I think my biggest thing is, oh my gosh, you can't even like choose. I would say those rising temperatures, like with carbon emissions, like there's AI factories and AI databases that are being made, and every paragraph that is generated is emitting so much. And so everything that we've done so far is kind of being reversed just like that in a second when you generate just one paragraph. So like that's terrifying. And then specifically with rising temperatures, like fire is so important, but the length of fire season has increased so much that everything's constantly burning. And every fire puts so much emissions in, and then glaciers are non-existent at this point now. There's no live glaciers in the Beartooths anymore. Like, that's all of it. But yeah, I would say the rising temperatures are a big issue for me, and I would really, that's why I want to do wildland firefighting. Like, I want to take action. I want to do my best and do it in a safe manner and in a manner that was once done before, and restoring that natural succession and regeneration.
So what freaks me out, besides all of everything, so we have, like, in my lifetime, I'm 25. So with fire season, that's a good example. So I've gone from being younger, and, you know, fire season was an integral part, and now it's kind of exploded to not go to, like, pun adjacent or inflammatory, ha ha ha. But what really freaks me out is we have these people who have dedicated their lives, these scientists and researchers who, this is their specialty, this is their field that they study, this is their life. And they come out and they say, here's our research, here's all the information. We should probably change things. And the minority that is very vocal and holds a lot of power says, nah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like, nah, we think you're wrong, actually. And I go, but they've spent a lot of time researching this topic, and you haven't yet. So it's essentially the disregard for experts in their field. And essentially it feels kind of like just screaming into the sky sometimes.
I think that's so fair, Aslan, like screaming into the void. But I would say climate migration. I'm sure you've all seen kind of that meme on social media that says we're all closer to being climate refugees than billionaires. You know, and even like I know many people in Pacific Palisades in LA that lost everything, you know, including like multi-million-dollar properties and fancy cars. Like their wealth did not protect them from climate. And yes, there were issues with like the response and everything, but they're so far away from being billionaires, right? So I just think that climate migration is a big issue. I always talk about, in One Green Thing, I say one of the things we all need to do is have a go kit. You know, no matter where you live, you have to have a go kit. It'll ease your anxiety. American Red Cross has been saying that for 50 years, that we need to have it, and we do. So I think that one of the miniseries that I recommend is called Extrapolations. It's an Apple TV series with Meryl Streep and Forrest Whitaker and Ed Norton and a lot of famous actors. It's a little bit like the sci-fi series Black Mirror, but it's for our climate futures, and it's by the producer or the writer of the book Contagion. It is really, really interesting, and one of the things they talk about is in the future extreme weather events and how it impacts people's ability to basically deal with reality. And so there are people who are having extreme mental health episodes because of climate. So I think that the what freaks you out the most question is an important one. But I think one of the things we've done really a good job of in the environmental community is outlining all the risks. But what we also need to do with the same amount of energy, because we're realizing that's not motivating people to change, right? We need to talk about what this alternative future could look like. I know we had an architecture firm here, but talking about green design, talking about what, you know, Billings is possible for it to look like in 2050 with solar, you know, rooftop and gardens, community gardens everywhere. What could that greener, healthier future look like? And using a lot of our creative energy and our talent to start creating those pictures and showing people what's possible is really important to show what we're for, because I think we're seeing that people aren't motivated even when they've lost everything, right, to make those changes, and that's really scary, yeah.
Oh, yes, thank you. I had something to add as well, almost on the opposite side of the spectrum of nothing. I don't know if you've heard of the logical fallacy called an ad hominem. It's when a person attacks the other person that they're debating with versus attacking the topic itself. And that is destructive in a way, and it gets us nowhere, and it actually creates more damage than we started out with. So that's another thing that freaks me out.
Thank you, John. Thank you. And that's something where we need to move in close and build community, lift each other up, and talk to folks who don't agree with us in a respectful manner as much as we can.
All right. Did we have some more hands up here?
I think we have time for one more question.
All
One more
right.
question.
And Carol, I'm going to get you. You're going to be the grand finale, okay? But I want to get someone on the other side. And while I'm walking over, you were mentioning about community gardens, sustainable architecture. And that's a good plug for our event that's going on tomorrow night. We're going to be doing a tour of a really, like, the most sustainable home in Billings. So if you want to be really inspired of what you can do with your own home in an urban setting, you should come to the Eco Frontier Home Tour tomorrow night. All right, do you have a question?
Thank you. So I feel like climate awareness has risen throughout the years, but obviously it's not quite there yet. And I want to know, like, in a generation where we're witnessing historic floods, fires, species going extinct, microplastics in human organs, what do you think is going to be the event that spikes that awareness to a point where maybe real change could be made?
I don't know, because I keep thinking this is it. You read in my book, I talk about my first daughter was born in 2005, so she's 20, and I remember watching Hurricane Katrina unfold. And I thought when I had this newborn baby, who's now a junior in college, that like this was the turning point. So I keep thinking we're seeing the turning points, and I haven't seen it, so I'll let you all chime in. But the one thing I do want to say is that I think that the older generations in here, we do need to keep making sure young people know that we have done big things before, whether it's the Montreal Protocol, whether it's the nuclear freeze movement. We have had global movements for huge change. It is possible, and I know COVID is a really bad example, but we did shut down. We did shut down for a month in COVID internationally, and we saw climate emissions fall. Like, we can take action if there's political will, and we just have to make sure that there is a touchstone in this conversation, because I'm not talking about shallow optimism or being a Pollyanna, but we can do this. We are running out of time. We can do it, though, but go ahead.
Okay. This may be a 50-50 split on opinion, but I believe that the utilization of artificial intelligence is going to be a turning point in our lifetimes if we do it correctly. Tracking weather patterns has become much easier, for example. Organizing data fast and accurately with less human error, that's, in my opinion, a turning point.
I would say that I agree. There is a lot more people who are extremely worried, I guess, about our climate, especially in the past, I think 10 or so years. It's increased about 13% in people that are extremely worried about kind of the environmental aspects of our Earth. So it is increasing, but I don't know that it's increasing fast enough. And I'm not sure that necessarily it's kind of the will of the people, because a lot of the things that we're talking about, it harming the people isn't necessarily enough, and that's kind of an unfortunate truth that we talk about with all these natural disasters. We have tornadoes and floods and hurricanes and fires and all kinds of natural disasters that kind of harm the people, and they harm some of the rich like they did in California, but I think it would take something huge like COVID where it shut everything down, because once we saw all of the factories and all of the huge corporations, like once we saw everything shut down even for a short period of time, our emissions decreased, right? There was more wildlife that was safe and protected, and they were kind of out and about in our cities. There was a lot more clear skies in different countries and things like that. And so I think it would take that kind of a large event on a major scale, but whether or not that would kind of harm our economy is another question at large as well. So it's kind of up and atom, I guess, whether or not it's going to be an event like that that does truly change things, or if it's going to take something much larger.
So as you said, like the fires, floods, weather events, they're incredibly extreme right now. And it's hard because we've had those before. And like you said, you would think that, oh, this is it. This is what will turn everyone. This is what will turn more people, not even just everyone, just a couple more. But it hasn't yet. And I think that's scary, because then it's going to lead to even bigger things that are even more destructive, even more damaging, and that can hurt a lot of people. And nobody wants that. But that comes into effect in not just environmental issues, that comes into effect with all issues, where it takes something really big, and that's really hard to wrap your mind around. When it's damaging so much and you're like, oh, this is terrible. Why aren't more people thinking about it? But I truly don't know what it's going to be. All I know is I feel like it's going to be really bad, and I'm really scared about it. But yeah.
I feel like my answer is very pessimistic. I'm like, oh, we should not have ended on me. I'm like, it probably...
We'll have one more question, I promise, just so you know. I've got it. Don't worry. We're not ending on this note, but go ahead. Aslan, you speak, but we're not ending on this note.
Because, yeah, I'm like, I'm with it. I'm just like, if it hasn't really occurred to people that a change needs to happen, then I'm like, it might, to use a literary term and what's used in media, a deus ex machina, a literal like act of God. Maybe, I don't know what it's gonna take for people to be like, wow, this has gotten bad. So I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know how far it has to go. I know a lot of mentality is we're not going to be around to suffer the consequences, so we're not going to fix it, is something I've heard a reasonable amount that I kind of am tired of hearing, because it's going to fall to younger and younger people to fix the problem. It's looking at the younger generations and being like, they'll fix it. They got this done. They'll figure it out. They can hand of God this, but no.
So I think there's one more time for one more question. Is that right, Katie? I want to be mindful of the time. Yes, I think there's one more question here. So we'll take this question and then we'll wrap it up.
All right, we have one more question here from Carol.
Yes, I really want to applaud you all. You have some great ideas and great passion. One of my problems is I'm a septuagenarian. I've been doing this for about 50 years off and on, and found groups like this having the passion, and then they just don't get it all together. They leave something out and it falls apart. I don't want to see that again, so I'm going to say something. We have some people that are older, and like you said, they don't want to talk to you because, oh, it's up to you. We have to put their foot to the flame because they have some knowledge, they have the experience, they've been treated as a throwaway generation. I have felt that way several times. We can't let that be part of the issue because we will not survive and solve this problem without that input. We also need to have some place where we can get the joy, get our the trauma and the anxiety, so we can put it on the back burner. One of the best places I find is you get out in nature. You befriend the animals, because if they know they can trust you, they will open up to you and they will make you feel awesome. That's the only way I have ever been able to keep going. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today.
Thank you so much, Carol. And I think that definitely sums up kind of one green thing and this whole perspective. I do have a final wrap-up question for the panel. This is a lightning round. No one is a thrown-away generation. There's no such thing as disposable people. Everyone matters. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is needed in this movement. And we need intergenerational conversation and commitment. It's not just up to these young people. They know that they're not alone because they're part of this community and they can carry that forward. Lightning round. What gives you hope? Because we're not leaving on a gloom and doom. What gives you hope? John.
Okay. I get hope in believing that a world is ever evolving. And I would like to end my thoughts with just three simple things: communication, awareness, and collaboration with humanity as a society. That's the big step forward, and I believe that we could do it. Thank you.
I get hope from the 57% that I talked about earlier, the people that are extremely aware. I get hope from the panelists that I'm here with today. I get hope from everybody that made the trip to come here just to listen to all of us talk about the environment and eco-anxiety and things like that. I get hope from my classmates. I get hope from people in my clubs and at schools, and I see people around Billings, and that does give me hope. It does give me hope that people are trying and they are acknowledging it, and so I do like to cling to that, especially when I see gatherings like this of people that do really care.
My big one right now is seeing all of you guys. It's really hard, especially being I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm not from the area, so I didn't feel like as accepted in this community in people who thought the same way that I did. And so seeing multiple generations and seeing that through everything that especially you guys have been through and all of the events that have happened, you guys are still here and you guys are still fighting. And I think youth specifically can look at that and learn from that, and that things you do, like to keep pushing for those things, and that truly does give me hope that there is a future, there is a path, and that we'll keep going down it. But like everyone in my life, everyone I choose to be around, anyone I just have a random conversation with on the street, like I love people and I love the hope in humanity, and I truly still have some. And yeah, that's it.
Well, to kind of go with it, what gives me hope is I I spend time with my siblings, and obviously, well, they're like-minded like me, and so we agree on a lot of topics, but it's essentially being around people who accept you, who support you, who, they have these similar ideas and ideals, and they want to work towards the same goals as you. And it's essentially surrounding yourself in a community that does want to make a change for the better, and who essentially just is open to everything. That's what gives me hope. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here tonight. These young people give me hope, but it's not all on your shoulders. We're here for all of you. In 2019, when my kids did the Bozeman climate strike, the kids were chanting, another world is possible. And another world is possible. We have the technology, we need the political will, and it's up to us, and we're the ones we've been waiting for. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, Katie. And thank you
Heather.
everybody for being
Thanks
here.
everyone for coming out. Make sure you grab one of our little flyers on the way out. It has our schedule for the rest of Billings Climate Week. Thanks again for everyone joining us here tonight. Thank you, MSU-B, of course, and all of our sponsors and partners. Have a great rest of your night. Thank you, everyone.
I'll be signing books, too, if anybody's interested with House of Books. Thank you to Julie for being here.